Well, hello everyone. Here to show you right here. I'm talking about loans though, and we're talking about mobile apps and loans, and it sure seems that way to where that when we speak about to where that digital coupons and maybe super saving coupons a lot like that, and I know a lot of times whenever you hear about that, whenever it comes to gas prices, if it's gas prices or anything, any other source of a situation whenever it comes to bills piling up and anything like that. But I'm just talking about right here of talking about with certain ways, and if you want to kind of call us as to where maybe just a little bit like maybe a pay it forward type loan, or if it's just like for any source of loan, if we all know what a loan is right here, that toward it, whenever we think about a loan, no, it's basically, I'm like, what you are doing is you're borrowing the money, right? And a lot of times it sure seems that way. That when we think about that, though, that yeah, if are we going to maybe ask that question to where that if there's any source of award offered toward it, if you do take out a loan, and let's just say that for maybe less than 5,000, maybe about 2,500 to $5,000 or something. So it's a lot of times that when we think about a loan, a lot of times that are we necessarily thinking about? Oh, okay, yeah, that we're not really in no favor of taking out any source of loan necessarily, just because of the fact that with most of the time with most loans that when we do think about a loan that you are borrowing, right? I'm like, it's not really. I'm like, and a lot of times it sure seems that way. That whenever we do think about borrowing money, and then of course you're transferring money or anything, and it's like, yeah, that whenever we think about that, a lot of times that if there's any source of like any source of points or rewards included in that. And so let's just say that if you do wind up taking out a loan for a certain amount, and of course that there's going to be interest added on to that, right? But a lot of times it sure seems that way, that maybe you're going to want to ask that question to where that, hey, that if there's any interest that does apply, and then also that there's any other additional fees along with it. And so it's like, yeah, that for the most part, though, that when we think about a loan, though, that I'm sure we're probably all thinking too that yeah, you receive that, you might receive that cash within the next business day, or if anything within the next couple of hours or something like that. So it's like, yeah, whenever a lot of people, whenever they do take out a loan, though, that it sure seems that way, that what's one thing that you really look forward to most of the time. And like, yeah, well, do you want to kind of look at that like, people might say that, hey, it's just the same way as that whenever you do get paid that same day, that what you actually are receiving is that you're receiving the money for what you call it. And half the time you want to know too that, yeah, that most of the time, like, ATM, ATM access at your own convenience or something like that. So a lot of times it's like when we think about a lot of these mobile apps, though, that how come, like you want to know too, that how come maybe that there's one app that you can kind of give it like a nickname, such as ATM 425 or something like that, and so it's like, yeah, 425, ATM 425, why does that seem like an easier number to remember, easier name to remember, if you're going to give an account like if you're going to give an account a nickname such as ATM 425, something like that. And so you're likely want to know too that, yeah, well, really, if you're going to get approved any source of loan, that you would probably want to set something that you can remember, such as a PIN number, right? But most of us would say too that, hey, that if you're going to be trying to get approved any source of loan, or what's one thing that you would really look forward to most of the time? And it's like, yeah, well, really, when we think about that, a lot of times with any source of loan, no, that you probably wanted to where that, yeah, well, you may not even have to pay the entire amount back, and then, like, let's just say that if you do wind up borrowing maybe between $1,000 to maybe $2,500, and you want to know too that if you're on time with your payments to pay it back on top of interest, right? And then not even like some private loans might even say that we won't even charge you any interest. If anything, just pay the amount from what you borrowed on top of them. Like if you were on time with the payments, and so I know a lot of lenders would probably say negotiate to where if you've been on time, if you set auto pay to where you would pay your payments on time. And so it sure seems that way that we would probably say too that well really that you answer a few questions, and let's just say if a lot of it is financial questions, but still that so it sure seems that way that between more or less so. And we could probably say too that most of the time whenever you do take out a loan, that most of the time, it's like well really that would you maybe have to pay a higher deposit before that you're allowed to borrow any more than that, or that you have to wait at least 30 days before you'll know if you could even borrow a little bit more this next time. So it's like that another way of how you want to call it is like doing business though, that when we do think about most loans though, that when we do think about most loans, and I can just say I'm like click right there, and it's of course it's going to ask for information such as email address and but still that but it's like that whenever it comes to understanding about loans though, and then but it sure seems that way to where that whenever we think about that renter so there's going to be questions on the app that's going to be asking, but on the other hand too you have these other apps here that the loan payday loans and cash, but so it sure seems that way that when we think about loans a lot of times that we probably say that well really that based on your experience though that you would if anything you would really only take out a loan maybe if you really need to take care of something important, right? But on the other hand too, it's like really though that whenever we're and half the time, in case of anybody may want to know too, is it going to remind you of one of those games, such as maybe if it's goldfish or if it's a game of blackjack or something like that. But on the other hand, it's like well really whenever you do take out a loan, what's one thing that you can remember too besides interest though, is that to where that about how often are you going to be making payments? And a lot of times that a lot of lenders would probably be looking out toward it. If you're going to be borrowing money for any reason at all, you may not even have to explain why you need the extra cash or what's it going towards or anything. But still, that I know that a lot of borrowers might even say that if anything, they have better luck with getting a loan from a lender. Just because fact number one about employment status, and maybe that they might even check they may not even check all the credit details or anything, but most of the time that when we think about that though is that to where well really how often are you gonna maybe work it out to where I'm like are you capable of making your payment on time? And let's just say that if those payments are going to be required about every 15 days or so. So let's just say if you do wind up taking out a loan, and let's just say if it's a payday loan, and let's just say within 10 business days that you go ahead and start making a payment. And of course, those payments could be smaller or bigger or like how you like, but on the other hand, it's like, that, most of the time with me though, that whenever I do take out a loan for any reason, that I would maybe suggest to where that within at least within at least 10 business days to try to make at least one small payment of at least 5 or 10%, on top of and I know a lot of lenders would say this to where well most of the time if you're charged interest, and then they say well really that but on the other hand that when we speak about loans, though, especially if we're talking about 45 cash right here, like what I heard of, and so it's like, yeah, that. So when we think about a loan, though, that are we necessarily going to be thinking about a paycheck most of the time, or if it's anything that, yeah, well, really, that money, I'm like, do you want to look at that to where that money can be paid to you as a gift if you are willing to negotiate, for the terms of the service. So let's just say that at the agreement to where that maybe if you did borrow $1,000, and let's just say that if you paid back maybe $750 out of that $1,000, right? And then let's just say that they're willing to award you for up to 20% on from what you borrowed. So a lot of times that if I were to think about a loan, a lot of times that's usually what I'm thinking about is that to what awards, what sorts of gifts and awards that are available, and so it sure seems that way to where that are we when we think about loans though that do we necessarily do we really see too much of that to where we see gifts, negotiations, and gifts and awards that come in, and a lot of times it's like, well, really, that the only time maybe that you really could see that is to where that, yeah, if you go by like a time, like yeah, kind of, yeah, maybe a little bit like a time clock, but I was also thinking too that most of the time, though, that if we're talking about if you do wind up borrowing $1,000, and let's just say that within 10 business days that you go ahead and make a payment of $25 or something like that. So a lot of times I know with me though that whenever you do, like anybody say too, that you don't like taking out loans because of reasons. Well, one of those reasons is because is that you want to try to save up your money and save it for something special, right? But let's just say if you're in need for money immediately, and if we're talking about between $2,500 to maybe $5,000 here, then then that would be a time to where you would think about is to where that with contacting the lender, and so a lot of times it's like, yeah, if you gotta negotiate with the lender, that the first thing that you're gonna maybe think about is to where that, yeah, if there's any source of gifts or awards available. So let's just say that, yeah, well, really, that if you were to go ahead and yeah, shop, like, yeah, shop to where you go ahead and use their service in the way that they request, though, and let's just say, yeah, installing the app and following up about notifications by your email, and then making your payments on time, and more likely, like, yeah, that you would see gifts and awards being available. So it's like, yeah, like everybody would say too, that, yeah, well, really, if anything, yeah, you only need to borrow $1,000. But let's just say if somebody were to say that, well, really, that if you had to borrow $2,500 for any reason at all, if it's maybe for mortgage, for a home loan, I'm like, yeah, for any other source of personal loan. But on the other hand, though, that whenever if we were to actually do the math, though, that it's like you want to know too that if you did wind up borrowing 2,500, and let's just say that if you were able to get that settled just by only paying 1,900, so let's just say, yeah, somebody is willing to cut somebody's willing to dash the bill in half just by $700, and let's just say if that's the case, so that most borrowers would maybe warrant to were that yeah, that are you willing to take off $700 off of that bill, that the amount that you borrowed, if you're willing to negotiate to where that you can go ahead and where you make your payments on time, and that if you're allowed to borrow a little bit more, and what's considered a gift. And so I know a lot of borrowers would probably be asking those questions to where that they don't like borrowing any more than what they need to borrow, and that's why it sure seems that way, that we're going to go ahead and maybe answer that question to where that how much are you needing to borrow, and for how long do you think it would take you to pay it back in its entirety. And so it's like, yeah, so let's just say let's just say that if anything, if you do wind up borrowing money, and let's just say that if you're willing to work that out to where that you pay back maybe 1,200, you pay back 1,200, and let's just say if you did wind up having to borrow 2,500, and you wind up paying back 1,200, and let's just say that maybe that lender is willing to take $700 off of that bill for that reason. And let's just say that reason is maybe going to be is toward if you've been on time with your payments from the first 4 months. And so if we would actually do the calculations there, that yeah, if it took you less than 6 months to make the payments in its entirety, and if you were on time, and of course, like most loans are going to be like that, to where if you're going to be charged interest, especially, but on the other hand too, it sure seems that way. That well, any catch or anything like that. But the way I think about it, though, is that when we talk about loans, though, that we're not necessarily talking about free stuff or anything like that. But on the other hand, though, that are you able to get any sorts of practice with your long division problems and maybe solving math problems whenever you're doing that? And for the most part, though, that it's like the typical things that you may have learned while you using that calculator, that you try to figure out a lot of the math facts, right? And number one, though, that between positive and negative numbers a lot of times. So it's like you want to know too that if you wind up, to me though, like anybody say too that is taking out a loan basically the same thing as buying insurance? I'm like, not really, but let's just say that if you were to try to use it as an example, if you want to try to use it as an example to where that you're going to maybe have a deductible that has to be paid, and along with you're paying your monthly your payments, just for what for what plan that you're trying to get, on top, for your insurance coverage. So you're trying to get a settlement, a claim settlement, and all of this. So if you want to kind of like, if you want to use an insurance plan, I'm like, insurance plan as an example of taking out a loan. But I guess everybody else here would probably say too that well, like with insurance though, that what you're basically are doing is toward as you're giving yourself, like with insurance that you have like a source of protection, right? Claims of protection is with a settlement, then compared to using between taking out a personal loan. And so let's just say on average though, that if we're talking about any source of a loan, and let's just say that that if you were to go ahead and go to if it's Get Upside or anything like that, but there's still that whenever you go to the gas stations to fill up the tank with gas, that whenever we think about that though, that a lot of seniors would say too that the cost of that coffee is going to be a little bit more expensive than compared to that other gas station that you went to, and anything that you may have gotten from the restaurant or something like that. And so it's like, you'll probably want to know too that whenever you do think about a loan though, that you're basically are taking you're basically are putting in a request to receive what you need, right? What does that mean? Well, that pretty much means to where that you're putting in that request to where you can go ahead and receive the amount that you need to be able to take care of something important, right? And on the other hand, it's like you receive it, but then within days or weeks later, and then you just gotta know that whenever that bill come, just knowing about that for what you gotta do, right? But and I know most apps, of course, would work differently, but on the other hand, that whenever you're going to be asked that question to where how much are you needing to borrow, and I would probably say too that for the most part that each time that you if you do have to borrow a certain amount of money, I'm like, if you do have to borrow any amount of money, that you try to say that I'm like, yeah, between $100 to $500, right? And so it's like, yeah, that would probably be my first choice right there. Like you say, like, yeah, if you were to take out a loan, any source of loan, that you would probably say that you don't borrow any more than what you really have to. But let's just say on average, though, that if you do take out a loan, and let's just say that they might tell you that if you're going to be on time with your payments during the first 3 months of the process, and so let's just say that 1 week that you make a payment of 25, and then within that following week that you make an additional payment of $100 or something like that. So let's just say that if you were to do the calculations about how many payments that you require to make on top of staying posted by email about what you got to do next about that. And so to me, though, like anybody else would say too, that is it really the same thing as rolling the dice? Whenever you roll the dice, and maybe if you land on 5 or 6 or something like that, if you land on 5, then do you have a better luck of being able to, yeah, like a Monopoly game of Monopoly or something like that. But on the other hand, that we're also talking about is that with most of the time with most loans, that whenever you do, while you're managing any source of loan, really, whenever you are managing a loan, that you're probably thinking too toward, oh my, like I'm not really looking forward to that. But on the other hand, that it seems like toward, yeah, well, most of the time, whenever I do think about a loan, a lot of times, is that, yeah, well, really, just think about what you learned most of the time while you were on the, during the process. So let's just say if you did wind up having to borrow $1,000 for any reason, at all, and let's just say that if you did, you pay back 500 of that within weeks later, and let's just say that yeah, if you were making your payments on time for the first maybe 6 weeks or something like that. And I know a lot of times people might even say too that yeah, if you were making payments within the first 6 weeks after you take out that loan, then the chances are that you'll be awarded for gift of appreciation, right? So a lot of times that's usually what I look. That's usually what I look at. But on the other hand, that we probably thinking too that each time you take out a loan, though, that personal loan especially, that it's like we don't really look forward to a lot of those bills coming, and you know how that is that to where if you don't really, you would much rather save your money rather than borrowing it just because of the fact that you might see a lot less from that. I'm like, yeah, usually you see a lot less from that savings amount, but let's just say though that from the amount of money that you save, even though if it takes you days later to save up a certain amount compared to how much money that you could receive if you were to actually negotiate with the lender. So let's just say that we'll probably say too that seemed like it would take forever, really just say try to save up to $500, wouldn't it? Even 1,000, even $1,000, and so it's like, yeah, $2,500, and so that's why it sure seems that way to where that having access to an app like this, if you want to kind of cause is toward it, do you really have access to like a piggy bank? If you have a piggy bank that are we talking about maybe a penny per day or something like that? Yeah, you can earn a penny per day while you're working on the process. So whenever you do have to borrow money for any reason, and let's just say that at the same time that you are really putting your time into what you earn. So let's just say that whenever you do take out a loan, though, that if that lender can see that you're working at the same time that you're trying to work that out, to where I'm like, yeah, if you do want to borrow money, then that lender might even tell you that you don't have to pay that full amount back. You actually we're going to go ahead and gift you with the gift of kindness, to where that thanks for using our service. So I know a lot of lenders would probably tell a lot of their customers and their clients, and then especially their borrowers, is that yeah, well, really that if you've been on time with your payments for the first 18 weeks. And let's just say if you were to do the calculations to where if it takes you only 18 weeks or maybe 6 weeks, if you're on time with your payments for the first 6 weeks, then yeah, we'll go ahead and we won't make you pay that 10% and just pay that remaining balance right there. And so I know a lot of lenders would say too that yeah, a lot of times it's like when we think about a loan, that you're probably thinking that we're really, you would actually would prefer to save the money rather than having to borrow it, from a lender. And so that's usually what I think about too. That would you much rather try to save the money just to see how much money that you're able to save rather than negotiating with the lender? But let's just say that lender is maybe going to tell you that, hey, you do a service with us, and let's just say that if you're willing to you follow the instructions on what you got to do next after you do receive that loan. And so I know a lot of times it's like, yeah, a lot of companies, and I'm like, yeah, Quicken, I'm like, yeah, other loan companies would probably say that to where that, yeah, well, really, that take out a loan is not everybody's favorite, but let's just say that if you can maybe find a gift and kindness, trust and relationship about the whole process to where that really, maybe not everything is not all that bad the way we think about it, but just say, put your mind to it to where that yeah, think about a loan as as your neighbors, and a lot of times it sure seems that way to where if you want to just tell everybody that think about a loan as your neighbor, a neighbor that you go ahead and say that gift the kindness toward that, yeah, you go ahead and do favors. I'm like, yeah, do a favor for us and we'll go ahead and give you a gift of kindness toward it. Yeah, thanks for using our service. And but the way I think about it too, though, that you may learn, you learn something almost every. I'm like, yeah, you learn something every day, right? But on your hand too, that we can maybe answer that question toward that. Why do you think that maybe that you would maybe do service with a trust and relationship with the lender than compared to having a savings amount? And it sure seems that way that yeah, well, whenever you have a savings amount, number one, though, it still may not be enough for what you gotta do. And so that's why that most of the time, that if you're trying to take care of something important, that it's going to cost between $500 to $1,000, just to be able to take care of it. And so that's whenever, most of the time, that yep, you would more likely have to work it out with the lender, just to be able to work things out. But on the other hand, though, that if we're talking about any sorts of savings amount, that yeah, that with the savings amount, though, that you really have to work, every day on the process. Do you really have to put your mind up to it and just to kind of learn the basics about how it works? And so it sure seems that way that when we think about that most of the time, that any sorts of loan that we do get, that yeah, you just really, if you're just checking it out, or really if you're just trying to get some specific training, but most of the time, like a lot of lenders would say to them, like, yeah, a lot of borrowers would say that hey, that whenever you have to borrow money for any reason at all, that at least what you can do is like do the studies about how it works, and then knowing about, we each have an assignment to do, and one of those assignments, of course, is just knowing about, for how much that you're willing to work with the company, just to know that, hey, now this is what I need, and then this is what I know, and then I'm willing to do the best of it. Anyway, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.